So what, in your opinion, constitutes a well-formulated ketogenic diet? And of course, you've alluded to this a little bit earlier. It's not the Crisco. Pure Crisco
No,
is not a well-formulated ketogenic diet. But what, and maybe at the same time, you can kind of, you've told us a little bit about what you eat, but if there's anything else you want to add about that as well.
well, sure. To me, a well-formulated ketogenic diet, and I love that phrase. That's due to Jeff Volek, by the way.
Okay.
It consists of adequate to substantial protein, consists of fats, and we don't have to demonize saturated fat. You don't want some kinds of fat like trans fats and things like that. But those are real outliers and generally aren't as widely available as they used to be. You want to make sure, though, a lot of ketogenic dieters have turned it into a carnivore diet. And for some people, that's really good. And they're benefiting because they're finally getting enough protein. But if you're getting enough protein in your ketogenic diet, you should not be frightened of having things like spinach, broccoli, asparagus, arugula. These things are all good. And sulfurfuran is good. I like sprouts, the little sprouts that contain so much sulfurfuran. So the ketogenic diet, there's a lot of ways to do it. But I wouldn't start with fat the way people used to. I would start with protein. And I would limit my carbohydrates tremendously. And the carbohydrates they do want are carbohydrates that come from dark green veggies and things like that. Arugula, spinach, kale, that kind of thing.
Yeah, good point. That kind of goes along with Dr. Bickman. Like, he was on my podcast once, and I've heard him talk elsewhere. So he has a little 4 pillars of nutrition thing that he describes. And one of them, the first one, well, maybe it's not the first one. It's like the second one, is prioritize protein. And so, yeah, basically if you have that mindset with the ketogenic diet and get your protein in place, like the foundation, the cornerstone, if you will. And then, add in some different healthy fat sources. And obviously the protein and fat come together in many cases. So you don't always have to be adding a bunch of extra fat.
Right.
Depending on if you're eating like fatty meat, for example.
Olive oil is great, really high quality olive oil. I'm an olive oil Nazi. And so at all times I have about 8 different ones, and I have a little jar with a little funnel. And so if I know I'm going to go to a restaurant, maybe I'm planning to have steak, I bring my little olive oil, and I bring my Chianti salt, salt from Chianti, which is ground so fine. I once got stopped coming into the United States. The guy inspecting my bag thought it was something else. Until I pointed out the little flakes in it were rosemary and fennel pollen, the little pollen from a fennel plant. And the guy was sort of dubious, so I let him have a taste. Oh, it is salt. But this Chianti salt is grind very, very fine. And so it's less harsh. Right? So I like that, and olive oil to supplement my meats. But as you say, most protein sources come along with a good bit of fat anyway.
Yeah, good point. So part of your previous answer made me think about how you talked about the arugula and broccoli and other things. Mm-hmm. In the keto, and by the way, there's a little background noise because my neighbors are doing some remodeling, so hopefully that's not coming through on the microphone too much. But in the keto and low carb communities, I've seen it and heard it quite a few times. And of course, carnivore. Part of the reason behind carnivore, the things that people will say about it is that they either have certain like side effects and problems when they eat vegetables, or there's these whole theories and books written about how vegetables are basically bad for you, and that's why you should only eat meat. Which, I mean, there may be some people who have individual, sensitivity or some, gut problem or whatever with a specific vegetable. In fact, there's some vegetables where that's not uncommon, right? But
Sure.
but in general, like the demonization of vegetables and the idea of like, and that being like a reason to eat carnivore. What are your thoughts on that?
unless the person has, now some vegetables are somewhat problematic, right? Lots of the nightshade family. A lot of people have a negative response to those. They have gut problems, relating to that. So, these folks that say this have a point, and everyone's different. But for many people, certain kinds of vegetables are not a problem, and they're not a problem for ketosis, particularly once you're well adapted. Once you're well adapted, you've been doing it a long time. Vegetables have carbohydrates, but you could eat quite a lot of spinach and still be in ketosis.